Why choose a Sleep Number smart bed?
Can I make my site softer?
Can I make my site firmer?
Can we sleep cooler?
Sleep Number does that. Cools up to 8 times faster and lets you choose your ideal comfort on either side. Your Sleep Number setting. Enjoy personalized comfort for better sleep night after night. And now, max out your savings. The more you buy, the more you save on beds, bases, and more. Plus, get free home delivery on any smart bed with base. Limited time. Check it out at a Sleep Number store near you or at sleepnumber.com today.
What can 160 years of experience teach you about the future? When it comes to protecting what matters, Pacific Life provides life insurance, retirement income, and employee benefits for people and businesses building a more confident tomorrow. Strategies rooted in strength and backed by experience. Ask a financial professional how Pacific Life can help you today. Pacific Life Insurance Company, Omaha, Nebraska, and in New York. Pacific Life and Annuity, Phoenix, Arizona.
No, I agree. And I think arguably we see real monsters when the fake monsters fail. You know, we see real monsters when fiction isn't enough to teach people or to change people or to encourage people. You know, we've been talking about the Wendigo and zombies and all those other things and some of the messages that they're sending about being kind, working together, not being selfish, not being someone who takes advantage of other people. And the real life monsters out there, they didn't learn any of those lessons, right? Their lives are all about satisfying whatever sort of dark desire they have in themselves that they either can't control or they don't want to control. And I don't think there's much to learn from them at all, other than this is what happens when people lose sight of their humanity, which I think is inextricably tied up in these stories that we tell ourselves and the lessons we try and learn from it.
That's Brett Talley, an author of several best-selling novels and anthologies, including He Who Walks in the Shadows, That Which Should Not Be, and The Fiddle and the Devil's Instrument. Brett is also the host of the highly rated true crime podcast, The Prosecutor's Podcast. This is the Silver Linings Handbook Podcast. I'm Jason Blair. Last year, Brett and I discussed why we love mysteries and the Dyatlov Pass incident, and what has become an October episode tradition. The year before, we discussed the way that we see the world through horror. This year, Brett is returning to talk with me about the monsters we make, whether it's werewolves or zombies or Slenderman or the Algonquin malevolent creature known as the Wendigo. Folklore, horror stories, and other storytelling includes a host of monsters that often cross time and culture. They often appear at moments where we in society are ripe to learn a particular lesson. That's why I thought it would be interesting to have Brett come back and discuss some of these issues about the monsters of our own creation. Brett's been twice nominated for a Bram Stoker Award for Superior Achievement, the top award for horror writing presented annually by the Horror Writers Association. That Which Should Not Be was Brett's first novel, and it was published in 2011. In addition to being nominated for the Bram Stoker Award for a writer's first novel, it was a semi-finalist for the Goodreads Choice Awards and a winner of the Journal Stone Horror Writing Contest. That Which Should Not Be takes readers on a journey to Miskatonic University, a fictional school with a widespread reputation for being connected to the occult and the supernatural. There, a professor and a student search a nearby village for a book that's believed to control all the non-human forces that rule the earth. The pair bring the book back to Miskatonic University, opening a gate to the netherworld. Brett was also nominated for a 2014 anthology, Limbus Inc. Book 2, that he edited, where 5 masters of horror, fantasy, and science fiction told stories about a world of time travel, human sacrifice, intergalactic beings, and more. Brett is an attorney and also the author of several true ghost stories and a nonfiction book called Haunted Tuscaloosa, which explores the paranormal in the Alabama town from a now shuttered local insane asylum and antebellum mansions said to be haunted by ghosts to cemeteries where Confederate soldiers are said to still march, and ghost stories from the University of Alabama grounds. On the Prosecutors Podcast, Brett and his co-host, Alice LaCour, explore some of the mysteries of true crime, including strange disappearances, some of the big true crime cases of the day, but they also go beyond that. Often, Brett and Alice help bring clarity to things that seem mysterious, like their exploration last year of the murder of Ruthie Mae McCoy, which inspired the 1992 movie Candyman, and their exploration last year of the story of the man who inspired the fears of razor blades and poison being in Halloween candy in the episode The Man Who Killed Halloween, Sweet Dreams. Brett and Alice go beyond what might traditionally be considered true crime and have explored unexplained mysteries like Dyatlov Pass, where 9 Soviet hikers died under mysterious circumstances in the Ural Mountains, and the Kaimar-Debane incident, where 6 other Soviet hikers disappeared in the mountains near Lake Baikal in southern Siberia. They also have done other topics, like the humanoid creature reportedly seen in the 1960s in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, commonly known as the Mothman. The Prosecutors Podcast was the 2023 winner of the People's Choice Creator of the Year Award at CrimeCon. This October, they're tackling some twisted cases, including that of Richard Chase, the real-life vampire of Sacramento who put Dracula to shame, and the Slenderman myth and the murders that followed. Today, this is the second of 2 episodes on the monsters we make.
Yeah, exactly, right? Yeah, and it's just funny because you think about this stuff, and there's an argument, and I'm sure someone has made this argument, that it's a bad thing to lie to your children, right? Like, it was a bad thing for your uncle to tell you there was a boogeyman on the shelf. He shouldn't have done that. He should have misled you, right?
I was kind of mad at him for a minute, but in retrospect.
But, if you think about it as more in the style of this sort of allegorical lessons, you don't want your kids to go in the forest because there are dangerous things in the forest. So you tell stories about werewolves, right? Well, the werewolves aren't real, but the danger is, Yep. So it's this very interesting thing that we do. We lie to children all the time, and we do it for their own good.
And it's interesting too, because taking your werewolves example, werewolves in the woods, as a child, that can be one very practical lesson, right? Like, bad things happen when we run off in the woods without adults. You can find real cases like that. You guys just finished the West Memphis 3. That is a real life case of kids in the woods. But that same story, the same stories about werewolves as an adult, can not only have that powerful lesson as a kid, but they can have even more powerful lessons, about shape-shifting and change and how close we as humans are to being beasts and so on. And it's neat to me how a lot of these best stories, and it's kind of like, I think some like the best children's movies like Toy Story are like this, where they're written in a way that it can speak to many different audiences at many different places with different but connected messages. And I wonder, like, Dracula feels that way too, and Frankenstein in some ways feels that way. I wonder do you think that's intentional by the writers, or is it just something universal inside of us that we're learning and processing all these lessons that sometimes we don't even realize when we're putting these stories down?
I was talking about this, I can't remember where, probably on the podcast recently, about this notion of growing up and how, when you're a child, you think, oh, well, one day I'm going to be older like my parents and I'll understand everything and I'll have everything together and, that'll be great, right? and just in our minds have this myth that that's the way life goes, that you sort of start off young, you don't really know anything, you need to learn things, you need to really understand how to be a moral person, and then you'll get it, it'll all click, and then the rest of your life, you'll just live that, right? That's the way you'll be. And then you grow up and you realize actually no one ever really grows up. Like you get older, you get more mature, you do learn lessons, but you keep making mistakes. You keep trying to figure things out. You never really do. And I think that's one of the reasons that those lessons are for everyone. I think it is a universal thing. I don't think it's intentional. I don't think the authors can help it because I think those lessons are things that we need to relearn over and over and over again. And in fact, oftentimes we forget the lessons of childhood. I mean, just think about, how many people would never have gone into the woods by themselves as a child because there were werewolves out there, but then, get lost and die because they went hiking and they didn't tell anybody where they were going, right? Yep. So then something happens. Like that's a lesson that needed to be refreshed for those people. So yeah, I think those are things you never can stop learning or should stop learning. And those lessons never grow stale.
Yeah. And I think, it's kind of an interesting thing in thinking about, folklore and monsters themselves. I think they kind of like weaponize fear, which, is a weird thing to say, but weaponize fear to teach survival, to turn it into something good. And I always tell people, they'll say, you've learned so much from your mistakes, right? A common thing I've said. I said, no, I've just learned to make my mistakes better. So that injection, that booster shot of some of these stories are always really helpful, I think for me, because that, there's just certain wisdoms or truisms that in our day-to-day we just sort of lose sight of, and it's always good to have a version. And it makes me think like maybe we create monsters because we need them, not necessarily in the literal sense, but in the psychological, cultural, thinking about what you were talking about in the beginning about the Wendigo and the Ojibwe as moral tools, that there's sort of ways that we both externalize our fear, can talk about what we repress, can have discussions about what we can't explain. And it allows us to sort of confront these things, maybe in a controlled and contained way that might actually turn it into something healthy than just abject fear. Kind of the same way you were talking about true crime and women to some extent. It makes it containable in a way that can be healthy.
Yeah, it enables you to get your arms around it, right?
Yep.
I mean, these are all big problems that don't have easy solutions. And there's a lot of things we do to get our arms around big problems. One thing we do that's probably less healthy is the black and white thing you see in politics all the time, right? That, there's a political issue. Well, here's the very clear answer that my side has. And if you don't agree with that entirely, then you're just a terrible person, right? And, you are stripping away all the complexities of that problem because otherwise you can't get your arms around them. And you're just like, man, I don't know what to do. Like, how do you deal with this? This is way too complex. Let's simplify it, right? You see that happen a lot. I think what you're describing is a much healthier thing where you're using sort of your ability to reason and to think and to create and to conceptualize to attack these problems in a way that's manageable. And you see that through these various, whether it's folklore, whether it's horror, whatever it is. Today, it tends to be more in sort of the theater, right? It's a lot more movies. There aren't as many, I don't think, sort of, though, I say that. I was about to say there's not as much sort of word of mouth stuff, but we talked about the last time we talked about that yellow dye number 5, right? Like,
yes.
Somehow,
we all know that one.
We all know that got around before the internet. And that's just a remarkable thing about people. Like the ability to share and transmit ideas like that across cultures is incredible. And this is another example of that, just how we're able, because no matter where you're from, generally speaking, your problems are similar, right? At least big picture. And so all of these, you can watch it's funny. I was watching a Korean horror movie. It's called Exuma. It was in Korean. It was really interesting because it had all this Korean folklore in it that I didn't know anything about, right? And so I'm learning about that. But at the same time, the sort of core problems that they're facing are universal to everybody. And it's just a really interesting thing to see that when you encounter not only the folklore from your society or your community, but if you branch out and see what are people saying in other places, you'll see, this similarity. It's not the same, but it rhymes type situation.
Yeah, very similar sort of folklore and monsters have appeared in China, in Europe, in Native American cultures, in, all sorts of places. And they're so unbelievably similar, even though it was at a time where there wasn't a lot of travel and a lot of, and it's interesting that, maybe they also speak to some of the things that we have in common more than.
I think they absolutely do. Because you'll have people who'll say, well, that's because they're real. And why are there dragons in every culture? Because dragons are real and we've covered it up, right? And that's possible. Maybe that's what it is. Everybody saw dragons everywhere. Or it could be that this taps into something we should think about more, which is our shared humanity, that we are all very similar, despite very different cultural traditions, backgrounds, histories, religions, and everything else. We still have these very similar fears, these very similar problems, these very similar dangers, and similar ways of dealing with it through these cultural creations that we generate.
Yeah, I had a paranormal investigator on last year. And one of the things he said to me was he thought that the reason why ghosts appear in so many cultures is because there's nowhere where we don't have the two things that are most associated with ghosts. Grief, right? Grief related to loss, both for the ghost and for the person. And then love, because often ghosts represent like a loved one coming back or trying to find peace or trying to help you let go. And he's like, part of the reason why these things really appear is because there is just a thread between us to, as people, to be able to need to understand, wrap our heads around and process these different things. And I think about like almost every culture has some version of a witch or a giant or a dragon. And it really is sort of like common things that kind of tie us together. And then there are people like Count Dracula that are way out there. Only thing I got from that is don't visit Elizabeth Bathory's house.
Unless you want to take a bath in a different way.
Right, exactly. But that said, right, that's also a story of, it's a metaphor for so many things, and sort of including sort of like greed and other elements along those lines, and insatiable hunger, like the Wendigo. Yeah. Uh-huh.
If you want to just really fall over the precipice and down the rabbit hole, you can get into like Jungian psychology and the sort of idea of common consciousness, universal consciousness, and that we're all tapping into something that's like greater than ourselves.
A giant pool.
Sort of, take part in. I mean, that's always been something that I thought was fascinating as well.
Yeah, and it's kind of, I think for me, when I think about a lot of these characters and a lot of these things, there's, to your point that you were making before, there really is an opportunity to connect with people on some levels. It might be ghouls for one person or wendigos for another or dragons for another. But, we connect in that space that we all fear things and we all suffer from things and we can all learn from things. And I just sort of think of the people who run away from it. And I almost, this could sound kind of crazy, I feel sad for them in some ways because they have to learn, now I sound like an old man, but they have to learn these lessons the really hard way.
That's true. Yeah. I don't have the buffer anymore. I mean, that's because that's what we said, right? If it's a buffer, then it's a buffer between being told, which works every now and then for certain things, and experiencing the consequences. And that's not pleasant for anybody, right? So yeah, if you don't have the buffer, if you're not willing to at least engage in these ideas, you don't have to believe them. Like, you don't have to believe that the Wendigo is real, right? You don't have to believe that. You don't have to believe there are werewolves in the forest. You just have to be willing to grab a hold of these ideas and sort of struggle with them a little bit and think about them and think about what they mean. If you're willing to do that, you can learn the lessons. And that's, the people who don't listen to the October episodes, I think you're right. It's like, why are you not willing to just, think about this stuff some? You don't have to believe it, but just think about it.
Yeah, try to wrap your head around what lessons you can take from it. So, I was thinking about this as, you being an author and then also somebody who's paid close attention to this. Do you have, and we talked a lot about the Wendigo, and again, I could probably do a whole episode on it, but are there any sort of monsters that stick out to you as some of your favorites?
Well, I mean, I've talked about Lovecraft before, so I won't talk about Lovecraft again because I'm a big fan. Because as I said, all of his entities represent that true horror of like the cosmic indifference that you were talking about. One that we covered that I love because it's interesting because it's new. It's the Slenderman, and the way that Slenderman, which is just this random creation of somebody on an internet forum. They were having a Photoshop contest, like create a creepy Photoshop picture with a brief story to go with it, right? And this guy creates this Slenderman character in 2 pictures, both involving children, and sort of this notion that he has some sort of influence over the kids. And there were a whole bunch of entries on this forum, and a lot of them are really good. But that's the one that stuck, and it's the one that spread, and it's the one that became sort of its own sort of element of folklore, even leading to a crime later on. And it would not have done that if it didn't tap into something deep within the human psyche, right? And I think part of it is this notion of like, there's the stranger danger, right? Like there's this stranger who is talking to kids, who's offering them something that they don't have. It has elements of like online predation type stuff that you see having. It is a manifestation of that fear, but also it's an embodiment of independence for kids and their growing independence and their ability to go do things that they want to do, because that's part of sort of Slenderman's attraction, is this notion of like, come with me and you'll be able to sort of live out your dreams, almost like you were talking about with Hansel and Gretel. So I'm a big fan of that just because it is one of the most recent of these creations, and just goes to show that even in this modern world, with the way we look at things, this hasn't stopped. Like, we will continue to create these new ideas, which in many cases are just repackaging of old ideas, but nevertheless still appear new to us. We're going to continue to do that for really as long as we're around.
Yeah, and as long as we sort of need to, because I think about that time, I think Slenderman was around the early 2010s, late 2000s. Right. Yeah. And, so it's like you're describing, it's this tall, faceless, sort of humanoid type creature that wants you to follow it. And it's around a time where I think we were talking, social media isn't exactly in its heyday, but there are a lot of online publications. And one of the things, there's certain kinds of cases that I don't think are necessarily happening more, but because we have more media, we talk about them more. Like, people will talk to me about things like, I don't know, someone brought up recently, asked me to look into the data on female teachers who had sexual relationships with students. Is it getting, the numbers are going up. It's probably that it's getting reported a little bit more, but in reality, it's not as big, or, it's not has grown as much as people think. But it was around a time when Slenderman came up, we were talking a lot about stalking, we were talking a lot about abduction, and we were talking a lot about psychological manipulation. And it's sort of like the perfect character, the perfect like warning sign embodiment of all of those things.
And isn't that fascinating that happened?
Yeah.
Because you could have created that character at any time. And, probably someone did create a similar character to that sometime in the past. But there was a reason it got big. There's a reason that young people in particular online were so attracted to it and scared of it, because I think, like you said, it wraps all of those fears that we all had that were sort of coming to the forefront. The internet, when it first came around, I mean, some of your listeners probably don't remember that, but I remember when the internet started. I remember dialing up for the first time and that, screechy noise when you're
CompuServe.
Yeah. And at the time, it just felt like this is just amazing. And there's no downside to this. And how wonderful is this? We're all going to be able to talk to each other, communicate with people across the world. This is just the greatest thing ever. And we didn't see the dark side of it. And I don't really think we saw the dark side of it until the 2000s. It wasn't really until the 2000s when people started to realize there's some real problems here. Maybe with the invention of the cell phone, maybe that is what took it to the next level. When you now have the internet and the smartphone,
and it's in your pocket.
Together. Yeah. And that's right around when Slenderman comes up, right? Because it's in 2005, 2006 when the iPhone is invented, 2007, I forget exactly when.
2007.
And then by like 2010, everyone has one. And now you're seeing all of those problems. And I will say this, I don't know that we still have these people because, it's kind of like journalism. Do we still have people who look into things that are interesting? A cultural sort of history of Slenderman to me would be really interesting. I think that would be
a fascinating book.
Yeah.
Actually.
A fascinating book that probably would teach you a lot about that period of time.
Yeah, because the case that you're talking about, it's what was that? It's Waukesha, something like that. Wisconsin case where two girls, didn't they lure one of their classmates?
Their best friends.
One of their best friends. Yeah. Stabbed her, left her dead in the woods. And I remember a lot of the conversation after that being about Slenderman, the myths, influence on the girls. But I wonder if there's a different way to look at it, that while the girls were interested in Slenderman, they were interested in it for a reason, and that maybe Slenderman was about the underlying problem, like that we flipped the cause and effect in the equation, or maybe not flipped it. I think a way to say it is that Slenderman exists because this kind of thing is actually a real problem.
Yeah,
that kind of manipulation.
Did Slenderman influence them, or did they influence Slenderman? Because before they did that, I'm not sure that it was part of Slenderman's lore that he would get kids to commit crimes for him, right? That was their thing, that basically it was them or her. They either killed her for Slenderman or Slenderman would kill them. That's what they said. I think that was their own creation. That was their own addition to the lore that they then lived out. And yeah, I mean, definitely a dark side of lore creation. But once again, and I think this people always get this wrong. Always. Whether it's rap music in the early 90s or video games throughout the 90s. This notion that the video games are causing the problems rather than the reason people like the video games is maybe because these issues are already there, right? We want to blame the sort of manifestation of the problem that we're seeing rather than address the problem itself. And I think it's a similar thing with Slenderman.
That's an interesting thought. And maybe, when these things collide, maybe we should look at it a little bit differently or a little more deeply at what the sort of underlying lessons of the stories themselves. And so, when you think of something like Slenderman, and you brought up it was sort of dawn of the internet age. I don't know why I have this in the back of my mind, so you might be able to help me answer this question. But I have this weird fear, and maybe it's just recency bias because there are always going to be fewer recent folklore stories, But I have this weird fear that we're in an era where everything is like 15 seconds to 60 seconds, and that it's going to be really hard to tell or even create some of these stories. But maybe I'm wrong, and maybe it is some kind of recency, bias on my part.
I think only time will tell on that. I will say this. I think there will always be things like Slenderman, because Slenderman could very easily have been that. I mean, it's one post on a message board thread on a forum. So easy to lose that, right? I mean, like if you think about all the great art, all the great stories, all the great folk tales that have been lost, that somebody wrote for some random forum, 2 people read it, and then the forum closed and it was just gone, right? Yeah, that's going to happen. But I just think because there is this inherent need for us to create these myths, maybe they will be somewhat fewer and far between because we have other outlets, right? That's a possibility. And yes, I do think we do have that problem with like our attention span is shorter. But I think when things like Slenderman come along that really grab us and that really embody something we're dealing with at the time, I think it will have the ability to survive and to live on even in the age we currently inhabit. I mean, think about a good example of this. It's a totally different thing, but we talked about the Polybius myth.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, that's the arcade game that no one really knows whether it actually exists, right?
Exactly. But there was something about that story, once again, that appears on some random forum. There was something about that story that just really grabbed people and they just loved it. And because they loved it, it's lived on. And now you see it in all sorts of, art, movies, horror movies, all sorts of stuff. And I don't think we will ever lose, number one, our ability, and number two, our need to create these kind of stories.
Yeah. And I'm beginning, based on what you're saying, to sort of reconsider my proposition, because as you were talking about, and I know, like that one, this is a completely different thing. I'm thinking about the painting that's over my shoulder, and it's actually an indigenous painter. And there are a couple different, actually I have 2 over my shoulder. And one is a father who is sitting at a table with a newspaper with his son. And I love it because my dad used to do that with me. And that picture tells a million words when my dad walked in and I told him why. Like there was a lifetime of story in that. And then the other one is going back to the Algonquin. It's Algonquin indigenous people in boats crossing a canal. And that's like their origin story from getting from the New York area to Canada and the Great Lakes area. And then there's one more. So the next one, Hannah Hill's art, is the 4th piece of art. But the next one is actually a Native mother. And they have this cool thing they have these like the equivalent of cradles that are like little hammock blankets, and they'll put the baby above the bed in front of the window with a dream weaver on the other side. And they have this whole myth of the spider woman who came and protected the culture by building these spider webs. And I think all of those powerful stories are captured in just an image, right? So maybe it doesn't take someone writing the giant folk tale in the beginning. Maybe in this new era, it'll start with a picture of Slenderman or a picture of something else or a piece of art. And then people will build their different branches and adjust the tales and add to the myths and hopefully not kill anyone along the way. But maybe, yes, right. It gives me a little hope for that. Are there any monsters in your writing that you wish you had written about that you haven't, or that you plan to or hope to someday in the future?
Oh, well, one day when I find time again, an elusive thing.
Your very flexible schedule.
When my 3 children are grown and I'm retired, I can start writing about things again. I love horror. I love writing. I love telling stories. And I do think the best stories that I wrote, I think, are like most people's. I think if you can tap into those stories that sort of transcend everybody, we're always trying to be new and different and original, and that's great and that's wonderful, and you absolutely should do that. But I will tell you this: you're usually going to fail if you do that. Like usually, if you try and be completely untethered, maybe you'll
minus
create something
Lovecraft.
amazing. Yeah, exactly. Maybe you'll be the next Lovecraft, right? But there aren't many of those. And I think my advice for people out there is you can write a new story about an old thing. And you can do it very well, and you can teach a lesson, you can tell a scary story, if it's simple as that, in a way that's not been done before, but with something that is timeless. And I think that is will always be a successful formula.
Yeah, I think that's something that I've never really asked you about. And, like in thinking of something like that, which should not be, what story do you think you were telling there?
Well, the whole reason, it's kind of funny we're talking about this, because when I wrote That Which Should Not Be, one of the reasons I wanted to do it was because I didn't really enjoy modern horror that much. And I felt like, a throwback to the more traditional stories, the older stories, the timeless stories would be fun to do. So if you read it, all of the stories are, they are takes on things that people have talked about for a long time. I mean, there's a story about the Wendigo. There's a story that takes place in the Carpathian Mountains that's not about Dracula, right?
Right.
But does tap into that. There's a story that takes place in an insane asylum, something that's haunted our dreams for a long time. There's a story that takes place at sea. I mean, these are things that are universal and are timeless. And so when I wrote it, I was really trying to tap into that. I wanted to write an old school style horror story that had all of those things, and it was so much fun to do. It was just great. I mean, I love doing it.
The magical book too. You had that element?
Yeah, exactly.
The magical book.
100%, right? Yeah, and just, I don't know, like I wasn't trying to, and I think most people, frankly, when they write something and it's good, they're not really trying to preach. They're not trying to tell some like deep, meaningful story that's going to, make you cry or whatever. And maybe they are. But I think typically people who write really good stuff want to tell a good story. And in the process of doing it, as I said before, it's almost a subconscious thing. Like you're tapping into something and you don't even realize it. And when you tap into it, the readers see it too, because it's in them as well. And
right.
I think I am someone, and not everyone agrees on this, I have a bit of a plan, but I kind of let the story tell itself. And I think that's the way I've always been most successful in writing.
Yeah, no, I'm a big fan of that too. And it's interesting in thinking about the book, which I hadn't thought about in thinking about our conversation. You essentially have a professor and a student who, are using the book or trying to use the book to kind of get insight and control all these non-human forces that sort of rule the earth, right? And, you got the pair who, I'm not going to give up the whole story, but needless to say, like they're on a very similar journey to what we've been talking about in the sense of finding answers to why things are operating in the world they way, fighting back against, these intangible things, these metaphors. In a lot of ways, I think the two main characters in the book are doing a lot of what we've been talking about in the conversation. If that
one of them's even a skeptic who doesn't necessarily believe in all that stuff and sort of hit in the face with reality.
We'll have to invite him to our conversation next time. Exactly. Must have been a tough character for you to write. They always say just find someone in your life and model it out. You always have somebody. So what do you guys have coming for October this year before we wrap up?
Well, we like I said, we did an episode on Slenderman. So if you're into that, you definitely should check that out. We talked about haunted highways, which is very much what we've been talking about. All these stories about on these highways, they're all very dangerous highways where people die. And so what do you have? You have stories about ghosts and about all these other things that would make you be more cautious while you're driving down that road. I wonder if that might have something to do with it. Right? Yeah. So that's our most sort of paranormal one. And then we did a very straight, just terrible true crime case to start it off with, like, the true monster, which is always humanity. And you see
Right. Right.
And then we're going to finish it up. Not going to give it away because I haven't recorded it yet, but I think you will enjoy it.
Oh, that sounds great, right? It's funny you say about the real life monsters. I think they definitely scare me more. I don't know how much they really scare me, but I definitely think they scare me more. And I find them less productive. And I know this is a weird way to put it because, a crazy crime like the University of Idaho murders happen, and we all spend a lot of time trying to figure out the why did he do it? But why did he do it? But why did he pick them? And the why is probably pretty unknowable. Like, we can collect a bunch of information, we get it, it doesn't make sense. I don't think that I've come across like an Israel Keyes or Brian Koberger where I've really learned a really important life lesson, other than maybe, people are capable of some pretty horrible things, and like keep that in the back of your mind. But unlike the real life nightmares, I think a lot of, these either fictional ones or folklore ones, there really are deep lessons that we can get from it. So, I guess my message would probably be to everybody, you may want to give October a chance.
No, I agree. And I think arguably we see real monsters when the fake monsters fail. We see real monsters when fiction isn't enough to teach people or to change people or to encourage people. We've been talking about the Wendigo and zombies and all those other things and some of the messages that they're sending about being kind, working together, not being selfish, not being someone who takes advantage of other people. And the real life monsters out there, they didn't learn any of those lessons, right? Their lives are all about satisfying whatever sort of dark desire they have in themselves that they either can't control or they don't want to control. And I don't think there's much to learn from them at all, other than this is what happens when people lose sight of their humanity, which I think is inextricably tied up in these stories that we tell ourselves and the lessons we try and learn from it.
Yeah, no, that's a really, really good point, that maybe some of our real life monsters come because we don't learn the lessons from the fictional ones that we have. Yeah. That you can't control everything, that you shouldn't be selfish, that you should take care of your community. And you think about all of these horrible cases that we have, it's literally the opposite of the lessons that we can pull out of these things. Well, I can't say that it wasn't a deep conversation. I do.
It always
really,
tends to be.
Yeah, I do appreciate them. Definitely one of my favorite conversations of the year, both because of the broader topic, but it gives us an opportunity to go deeply into any of these things. Just wanted to give you a chance to, if you want to share any closing thoughts about what you think, from your perspective, what lessons can people take from these stories about these monsters that may not really be as harmful as we think they are?
Well, I think people are always looking for truth. You see this a lot. I mean, there's a reason self-help books and guru-style books are very popular. People want to be better people. They want to learn lessons. They want to grow. And I would just say, don't sleep on this kind of stuff. Don't sleep on folklore. Don't sleep on these stories about the darkness that is out there. In a lot of ways, you can learn many lessons about yourself, about how to be better people, about how to grow, about how to help others from these dark stories. So check them out. See this wisdom, frankly, that has been handed down across generations to us now. We're blessed to have it, and people should enjoy it. And above all, they should have a great Halloween.
Amen. Thanks for joining me for the second part of this 2-part conversation with Brett. If you'd like to join me for more discussions with me and other listeners, we can be found on most social media platforms, including a listener-run Facebook group called the Silver Linings Fireside Chat. For deeper conversations with our guests and live conversations with other listeners, you can also join us on our Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Silver Linings Handbook. I'm Jason Blair, and this is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. We'll see you guys all again soon.